The Heat have played 20 games already, an important benchmark for Pat Riley and the front office to form an idea of what this team will be for the rest of the season. So we'll be looking at each player on the roster and doing a little employee evaluation of our own, everything from productivity to working well with others and what they need to improve on this season. It's part one of our two-part player evaluations of today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg. Joining me as always, it's David Ramil. However you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, your favorite podcast app, thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. We've got part one of our two-parter today. We're going to do our 20-game player evaluations. The idea here is that we're going to evaluate each of the Heat's players like it's a job evaluation. We'll rate them in terms of their productivity, job knowledge, collaboration skills, attendance, before identifying some areas of improvement for each of these players. We're going to get to basically every player. So if you've been a little out of the loop on Heat basketball, this is a great way to catch up and get everything that you need to know. Or if you've been watching every game like we have, it's also a great chance to see if you agree or disagree with our evaluations. Yep. So let's just jump right in, David, and start with Jimmy Butler. What do you have for his productivity evaluation?
Let me just take a step back, and just in case anybody's wondering why the 20-game mark, well, Pat Riley has gone on record and said that that's usually around when he starts to have a clear idea of what this team is, whether or not they're a contender, what they need, what's missing on this roster, to get a gauge for the temperament of this particular group, because every year it changes. So that's why. Plus, they also have a couple days break in the schedule, so I figured it's a good opportunity to capitalize on that. But to get to your point, let's get to Jimmy Butler, obviously the best player on the team, at least for now. So in terms of productivity, I've got him at meeting standards. You either below standard, meet standard, or exceed standard. Jimmy meets those standards. Why? Because the standards are higher for Jimmy Butler. He hasn't done anything to necessarily put himself over. He struggled to start the season. He missed obviously missed the whole preseason, so he hasn't been the dynamic player we expected him to be. So he meets standards. Job knowledge, hell, he exceeds standards because nobody knows what's required of Jimmy Butler and this team better than Jimmy Butler. Even going on record just a couple of days ago saying this team was mediocre, calling out the rest of the group, and I think kind of lighting a fire under the rest of the team.
What did you think of that, by the way?
I think it's a little harsh, but I think it's also fair, and I think it's what a team leader does. I think he holds himself and these players to a higher standard, and so the fact that there's just a couple games over 500 isn't nearly good enough for him, and it shouldn't be.
I was surprised by it. That's not really Jimmy Butler's MO. His usual sort of modus operandi is to just claim championship predictions and all these things like that.
We'll get there. We'll figure it out.
Being honest. That was a sober look. It's like we're mediocre, but they're 11-9. They're 16th in net rating as we're sitting here talking today. Like that's a mediocre team based on everything on paper. But Jimmy Butler doesn't ever pay attention to what's on paper, right? Jimmy Butler and all these things, like we're as good as anybody. We're going to go win the championship. We'll see you in June, like all this kind of stuff. So I found it surprising. I don't know that he was necessarily calling out the team, because if you actually listen to the press conference, it was a sober look in a time where there ought to be a sober look, I thought, after a loss to the Indiana Pacers, the way that they lost.
Won,
he wants them to be better. But I did find it surprising that he went that way, because he doesn't usually go that way. He goes the opposite.
That's fair. Collaborative skills. Does he work well with others? Well, to me, I think he's been an excellent teammate, so he exceeds expectations there. And as far as attendance, well, he meets those. He's played actually more games than you consider, where he normally is at this time of year. So yes, he's missed a couple of games here and there due to injury, but overall, he's met standards.
16 of the 20 games. Only sat one back-to-back because of rest. He did have the ankle injury that forced him out for like a real injury, but in terms of just like pretend injuries, it was just one game so far.
Yeah, I saw some people chide him for missing that important game of the in-season tournament against the Milwaukee Bucks, but I think there was some legitimacy there to the ankle injury, and that's why. Yeah,
that's one of those ones. I don't think we even talked about that. It's like the in-season tournament. You want to get up, you want to give yourself a chance, but you also have to recognize that it's November, and you don't necessarily. And it's the right ankle sprain that keeps giving Jimmy Butler problems. So I think you want to probably be as careful as possible, especially against a physical team like Milwaukee. You almost try to save Jimmy Butler from himself, knowing what he's going to try to do against that team. So it's fair. Look, I think I agree with everything in terms of the productivity. I think meeting expectations is right. He has been better, 30 plus points against the Pacers in that home and home series there. So granted,
that might speak more of Indiana's defense than anything else.
The defense and the pace of the game, right? But I do like that he's going out there and being like, okay, you want to play like this? Let's play like this. Like in terms of just productivity, 30 plus points. He's had 4 30 plus point games this year so far. So like the highs have been really high for him. And so I think he started the season despite the rough start the first week and a half of the year. He's been pretty good. So the next part is what? Areas
for improvement. Yeah. If I'm targeting anything for Jimmy, I think it's the three-point shooting, which is dipped to 40%. No more 5-0 celebrations. He's not going to be at 50% for most of the season, obviously, and overall health. I think that's something that he just needs to keep that in mind. So to me, I have no problem with the games he's missed and the reasons why he's missing those. It doesn't seem particularly overt. So I just want him to be consistently healthy for most of the regular season.
I have play more like a star. Just be the star. Be the star player. You have a usage percentage of 26%. That's middling among players of his caliber. The Heat are 3-1 when he has a usage percentage in a game that climbs over 30%. The Heat are just better when he plays like a star. Point blank, period. That's it. Play like a star. Use more possessions. That means not just scoring, that's passing, that's all these things. But put the ball in Jimmy Butler's hands and let everybody else play off of him. The Heat are always better when that happens. Go play like a star. You can do it. I don't care about the right ankle sprain. I don't care about all this stuff. It doesn't have to be an every game basis, but do it more often because you've only done it 4 times out of Miami's first 20 games, 4 times out of the 16 that he's played. Either way you look at it, it should be more. So go play more like a star. That's the only thing. Other than that, no notes. No notes. Like he's just really good. Go be really good more often.
I just wonder if the nature of this team kind of just requires Jimmy to be more – just to give up the ball a little bit more. Like I know that's normally the policy for other teams, but the way they're structured, but you've got to give Bam his touches. You've got to give Tyler his touches once he comes back to the lineup, etc. This is just more of an egalitarian sort of offense. I just don't know if it's necessarily.
It doesn't have to be like 36%. It doesn't have to be like Luka Doncic heliocentric offense. I just say like we're talking about 26% to 30%. Just use a little bit like those dead moments beginning in the game where he kind of just floats through the first quarter sometimes.
Yes.
Take over earlier, that's all.
Okay. Overall assessment of Jimmy, I think to me, this is what I've got. Jimmy is still the team's most complete and dominant player, but there are signs that might not be the case beyond this season. Still, he is the team's leader and a much better locker room presence than most people believe. So that's my overall evaluation of Jimmy this season.
What about Duncan Robinson? Let's just jump right into him.
Duncan Robinson. Well, I mean, he's had an incredible year. So as far as his productivity is concerned, I think he's exceeded expectations for job knowledge. The fact that he's been more versatile, making plays for others, but still cognizant of the fact that he has to be the deep range threat that he's been throughout his career. He exceeds expectations, collaborative skills, again, sharing the ball, doing everything on offense, exceeding expectations. Attendance, he's met expectations, missed a game, but overall he's still been a mainstay for Miami this season. Area for improvement, just continue to stay aggressive and tighten things up on defense, which he has improved on. So if anybody hasn't really noticed Duncan, I think there's an overall improvement across the board, but on defense, he still does need to be a little bit more locked in on occasion.
The defense is such a good point because he's still targeted because he's Duncan Robinson and that's just what's going to happen. But it's not been as egregious, right? And Miami, give them credit as a team, have done a better job of covering up, kicking him out of bad matchups, preventing him from getting in those bad matchups in the first place. They've been so good, especially when Haywood Highsmith has jumped into that starting lineup. It really cleaned things up defensively for them. But in terms of areas of improvement for him, do more of what makes you great, Duncan. I love the 2-point shots, the layups, and all these things. But there are now times, and I've noticed this the last week or so, where he'll curl off a Bam Adebayo screen, and he won't even look for the 3 sometimes. I think I like the fact that he could put the ball on the floor and then he can get to the basket. But that's never going to be the part that makes him great. That's never going to be an elite skill set for him. It's going to be a good one. It's helpful. I'm not taking anything away from him. But you got to use it as a counter to the closeout, not as your default, because this team needs him to take threes first and foremost. That's the thing that's the one thing on the game that he is elite at. Top 1% in the NBA, elite at. He's averaging 6.8 3-point attempts per game. He's shooting at nearly a 45% clip. I think he should be legitimate, and especially as a starter, he should be closer to 8 or 9 3-point attempts per game minimum for this team. So that's why.
Especially given how quick his release is. Nobody quicker than him other than Steph Curry in terms of that release. Like, he can get that shot over, and there's still moments there where you find him. You look at him doubting himself, and he shouldn't. He should just let it fly.
The doubting is less.
But, that's like, basically
just look for it. Just look, like, once you come off that screen, it's probably going to be open, and Miami's offense is more dynamic when that's the case. All right, we're going to continue with our 20-game evaluations. We're going to get to Tyler Herro coming up. A tough evaluation considering how much of the season that he's missed, but we do have notes that's coming up next year on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. Look, if you've got friends or family, loved ones of any type, and you worry about them and the medications they might need, well, there might be supply shortages, and there have been, and there might continue to be some down the road. And if you want to avoid those, if you don't like that feeling of being helpless because you want to be able to provide for your family and loved ones, well, then Jase Case is the one for you. They've got a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, respiratory infections, whatever you might think of. Jase Case has you covered. So visit jasemedical.com and complete your physician encounter, and it will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. Who doesn't like that? So if it's never been more important to be prepared than today. So go to Jase Medical, that's JASE medical.com, and use the code LOCKEDON, and you'll get $20 off your first order. So go to jasemedical.com, use the offer code LOCKEDON for $20 off.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and your favorite podcast app. Thanks to everybody who has shared their Spotify Wrapped with us. If you have Locked On Heat as your top podcast, please let us know. Share a screenshot with us, Twitter, Instagram. We love to connect and celebrate with you here at the end of the calendar year. We're continuing along with our 20-game evaluations. Already talked about Jimmy Butler and Duncan Robinson. Let's move now to Tyler Herro, David.
I've got Tyler with exceeding expectations in terms of overall productivity. I don't think there's any denying. Like, you kind of question the efficiency and everything else, but in terms of what he's been able to do when he's been on the floor, to me, he's exceeded expectations. Job knowledge, I've got him just at meeting expectations because he's still kind of finding that balance between being the playmaker, finding himself within the confines of the offense, and understanding what his role should be. So I've got him kind of just meeting those expectations, not necessarily below, but definitely not exceeding them either. In collaborative skills, again, I think he's meeting expectations. There's the understanding that now with the ball in his hands a lot more often, he's got to be more of a playmaker to have that kind of diversity on offense that makes the Heat so much more dangerous. And they've looked that way without him in the lineup. That's not necessarily on Tyler's shoulders to bear. It's a result of many different things. But I'd like to see some more understanding of how he can share the ball more effectively. Attendance, well, I mean, that's below. It's not his fault. Like, an ankle injury, whatever. Yeah. But when availability is an important ability, and for Tyler, he just hasn't been on the floor enough to show us consistent growth. In terms of areas for improvement,
can we go back to the collaboration part of it? He's leading the team in assists.
Yeah, I get it.
I thought specifically his collaboration with Bam Adebayo was really good before the injury. That 2-man game really started to blossom. And he does need to figure out ways to get other guys involved a little bit more, because it felt like, I haven't looked this up, but of his assists, I would say most of them were to probably Bam and then just feeding Jimmy in the post and let Jimmy go into work and sort of getting like the fake assist credit there. Sure. Again, I haven't looked at those numbers, but I would guess that's probably what it is. But there is something to be said about leading the team in assists, which he is right now per game, obviously.
But it's also a smaller sample size, 4.6 to Kyle's 4.4, and just above Bam at 3.9 too. So it's just, again, I think it's more symptomatic of just having a very egalitarian offense where the ball is shared.
This team's got basically, you go from Josh Richardson up, you got 5 guys averaging at least 3 assists per game. That's a lot for any one team.
Yeah, exactly. But that's also, I think, the way this team is. It's geared, so it kind of counters again what you were saying earlier about Jimmy. It's not. I'm not disputing it necessarily, but I just think this team is kind of just built on the idea of everybody shares the ball, everybody looks for those weak points of the defense and finds ways to attack them.
You had meet expectations for collaboration on Tyler Herro?
Yes, I do.
I think that's fair. No, I wouldn't put exceeding. I think meeting is fair, but I just wanted to point out the assist numbers there. like I said, you got to the two-man game with Bam and everything was like that. Can you develop chemistry with other guys once you come back? But what's your area of improvement for Tyler?
The ability to adapt and play off ball, because I think he's still figuring out those nuances. He's getting better and he's shown improvement, but I think just it's a strength of his to go get a bucket, but he also needs to find how and when to get a bucket and how to get everybody else into their spots to get those buckets as well.
I have, what did you learn by watching Duncan Robinson? That's my question to him. At 20 games, if I had him in my office, I said over the last 12 games, basically, what did you learn by watching Duncan in that starting lineup? That's what I would ask him. I think Tyler Herro, we talk about blank player light, is Jaime Jaquez Jr. or Jimmy Butler light? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Can Tyler Herro be a Duncan Robinson heavy? Can you just be a better version of what Duncan Robinson is in that starting lineup? Because that, when you talk about starring in your role versus like rolling in your star, basically, sometimes I feel like Tyler Herro is just trying to roll his star into the game. Yeah. And he needs to star in that Duncan Robinson role. Come off those screens, be a catch and shoot threat, space the floor, be a 5-alarm fire coming over a Bam Adebayo handoff 30 feet from the basket that opens up everything around the basket in the paint. Like, that's where he can make a huge impact on this team, and that gives Bam Adebayo more opportunities in the paint. It gives Jimmy Butler more opportunities in the paint. And by the way, all those opportunities for Tyler Herro will still be there, just like they are for Duncan Robinson. You come off that screen, if that three's there for you, shoot it, baby, go for it. And guess what? You know what the best part about 3-pointers are? They're worth more than 2-pointers. So that your point totals and your all-star stuff that you want to get to, that's only going to improve. You're only going to get closer to those goals. And then once you come off those screens and when they close out on you, get into your 2-point game, man. You're crafty. No problem with that. But it's got to be within the flow of the offense, which I think is what Duncan Robinson has been so good at, which is why I would ask him, can you just take what Duncan Robinson is doing and just be better at that? Because you can. You have the skill set.
I don't want to be a rabble-rouser, although that is my nature, but do you find that a little disconcerting that Tyler has not been on the sideline for games? Because I think that would give him the opportunity to see exactly what it is that you're talking about much more closely. Like, he does not need to. But is there something about sitting there on the sideline for a player because they know so much of the details of those games when he's not there, he's not able to see how the teams move?
Yeah.
With Duncan
I think I always kind of give guys a pass with the lower body injuries because that's such an uncomfortable spot, the sideline there for these guys. It's why they don't really travel a lot of times with lower body injuries versus like a fractured wrist, for instance, as opposed to a sprained ankle. Like, it's just a little bit more difficult. So I usually give guys a pass with the lower body stuff. It's not even something that I've honestly thought very hard about. I know that
Do you think he comes back Friday against Cleveland?
I wonder if he's going to come back. Friday versus Cleveland could be a good. I mean, we know that he's nearing.
He's not traveling with a team to Toronto.
So right. Should we get to Haywood Highsmith?
Yeah, let's do that. Haywood has been a surprise addition to the starting lineup, but we talked about that even in the preseason as a viable option. In terms of productivity, well, I think he's below standards, to be honest with you. I had him at meet standards, but the more I thought about it, I think he's just below standards. Job knowledge, I think he exceeds it. I think he knows what he has to do, and he's capable of doing different things and bringing the ball up, swinging the ball, popping from the perimeter. He just doesn't have the ability or the consistency.
Defensively can play in all of Miami's looks, which is huge. Zone, switch, man-to-man. He thrives in all of those defensive alignments.
Collaboratively, I think he meets standards. Again, he's not gonna pop as a playmaker, but he makes the right pass. He doesn't force the ball too much.
Sets good screens. Good screens, which I put in that category.
Yes. Absolutely. Attendance, he meets the standards. He missed games early. He's going to continue to miss games, I think, with that lower tailbone issue. We'll see whether or not it's able to heal with a couple of days off in between Saturday night's game and Tuesday night's game against Toronto. Hopefully he'll be at 100% soon. He's not listed as out for the Toronto game, so my assumption is that he'd be available to play that, but we'll see how it shapes up. And in terms of just overall area for improvement, the same thing with always. Like, his defense is never the issue. He's a great team player. Love having him in the locker room. Love talking to him, but he's just not a consistent scoring threat, and therefore he winds up becoming a liability for that Heat starting lineup.
Yep, and it goes back to the productivity point. You could argue that productivity. Is it just the stats? Like, you could probably go meet expectations with him just because of how he's been able to produce defensively, even just beyond the steals and the box score stuff. Like, he has been a productive defensive player beyond the box score, but he does need to be more of a factor offensively. You can't be Luke Babbitt on offense where you go 1 for 3 from the corners a game. And you just can't. You need more from him. Can you get up more threes? He took 2 total 3-pointers in those breakneck pace games against the Pacers this last weekend. 2 total. He needs to get up more. He's at 3.3 per game. He's shooting 32% right now. You get up more, I think that percentage will climb, actually, the more he gets up. I'm not asking him to be Duncan Robinson or Tyler Herro and take 8 of them a game. But you should just be taking them more often. And that 3.3 per game, that's been dipping lately. If he could stay around there and get that percentage up a little bit more and be around 3.5 per game, I think that's a fair number. 3.5, 4 per game. I think that's a fair number. But he's got to dominate those corners. He's got to dominate those corners the way that PJ Tucker dominated those corners.
That's right. 3.5, at least 35% per game. Like if not closer to 37%.
Absolutely.
I think that's fair.
If not, his spot in that starting lineup could be I don't know that it's up for grabs necessarily. I don't know who else on this roster takes that spot. I think they're very happy with Caleb Martin coming off the bench in that role, but it could be an area that they look to improve by the trade deadline if Haywood Highsmith can't be more productive from that spot in the starting lineup.
Good point.
All right, we're going to talk about Kyle Lowry next. He's actually been really good, David. I don't know how many notes I have for Kyle Lowry. We're going to talk about that next coming up here.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The weather's getting colder, but the NFL offers are still hot over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Hey, your team won this past weekend. I know you don't bet on the Dolphins, but impressive showing against the Commanders. What a stupid name.
Yeah, and like I said, with this moneyline bet, like the Dolphins have literally beat every team that they've been favored against. So you get the money line here. You don't have to worry about the spread. If the Dolphins are going up against a worse team, just bet the money line, and you're basically guaranteed $150 in bonus bets here. That's the way it's been so far this season. I don't know if you haven't done this yet, why you wouldn't do it going forward.
Absolutely. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, to your point, there's no better time to get into the action. And the app is so easy to use with a wide range of betting options from spreads to player props, over-unders, and so much more. Go visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and your favorite podcast app. Continuing along with our 20-game player evaluations, part 1. But don't forget, that means the part 2 is coming up. Part 2 coming up later. Bam Adebayo, Jaime Jaquez Jr., Caleb Martin. We'll get to our evaluations of all those players and more in the next episode. But let's finish off this one with Kyle Lowry and Thomas Bryant. We'll start with Kyle Lowry, David.
Kyle, what can you say about Kyle? Like I know there's a discussion all over the internet and the social media this past weekend, and the criticism is always going to be there. He had a lackluster game. Yeah, and you should. I paid more attention to it than I would have liked to, and that was only for a few minutes. He had a lackluster game on Saturday, and I think whenever he has a bad game, it just gives everybody, local media, fans, everybody, just an opportunity to pile on Kyle. And I think it's just so unfair of the critique.
The old Kyle pile.
Yeah, the old Kyle pile. Yeah, no, I think, look, he doesn't do himself any favors because he's just brusque, right? Let's just use the word brusque. He is absolutely cantankerous. That's a great word. And so when he brushes off media, well, they're not going to write glowing fluff pieces about you because that's just the way you are. Like you can be a dick. Look at Jimmy Butler, but you have to be Jimmy freaking Butler when it matters most. You can't just have a 10-point outing and then be like, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to talk to you guys because I just don't feel like talking to you guys, which is totally understandable. I mean, I know it's not ideal, but it's totally understandable.
Jimmy does fulfill his media obligations.
He absolutely does. He does the bare minimum sometimes, like in terms of answering questions, but he absolutely meets those expectations. Kyle, sometimes not so much. And I think the media day thing stuck in everybody's craw to some degree, especially when you were the off season and you were going to get traded for Dame Lillard, and then you're kind of stuck with Kyle Lowry. But I think he's been great on the floor. He has exceeded productivity in terms of his shooting, his production overall, finding seams in the defense, doing everything he can. Again, second in teams and assists. I think he's been very, very good. And if you haven't watched him play and you've just got this preconceived notion he's being overpaid, he's washed, he's old, he's fat, whatever, just watch the goddamn game and watch him actually play because he's actually been pretty good.
Wait, can I jump in there?
Yes.
He's 37 years old. He's not going to score 16 points a game anymore the way that he was in his prime, where it was like 16, 17 points per game, 8 or 9 assists, and great defense. Like that's just not who he is. He's 37 years old. He probably shouldn't even be in the league right now. So the fact that he could be a starter on a good team says a lot about where he is. Yeah, there's going to be nights where you want more. There's nights where I want more. But again, you got to remember he's 37 years old. So if he can give you one of those great nights once a week, then I think that's fair. And when Tyler Herro went down, and I told you this to you on the show, David, I was worried that he would almost go the opposite direction of what this team needed him to do. That when Tyler Herro went down, he's like, okay, then I got to find us a new Tyler Herro, and I got to just feed everybody else the ball.
Everybody going, yeah.
And instead, he's done what he needed to do, which is what I hoped he would do. He's like, okay, I'm going to come off the screen, quick trigger, catch and shoot. Boom. I'm going to get to my spots. I'll get to one of those little vintage turnaround jumpers in the lane that I do every once in a while. I'll get to one of those every other game. Like, he's shooting 44%, better than 44% from three-point range on 4.7 attempts per game. It's almost 5 of his 7 field goal attempts per game are coming from 3. That is a beautiful ratio. That's exactly what you want from a 37-year-old Kyle Lowry, because he doesn't have what it takes to get to the rim anymore at 37 years old, but he could still shoot the ball.
Yeah. So in terms of job knowledge, then I think he exceeded expectations, understanding what his role is at this point and finding ways to be more effective and get everybody going at the same time. Collaborative skills, again, fitting in there, making plays for others. He's exceeded expectations. In attendance, he's been great. He's been consistent. He's one of Miami's most consistent players in being available. He's exceeded expectations.
19 of Miami's 20 games.
Yeah. For a 37-year-old, like last year, we remember that he led the league in minutes for a brief time there, and that wound up biting him and the team in the ass later on.
Put a pin in that.
Let's hope he can avoid that, because that's where my area for improvement comes along. I think it's the overall health. He needs to be durable, and I think that's something he needs to monitor and do whatever he can and work out some maintenance program with the team, whatever it takes. As a high-end competitor, he probably doesn't want to. But at some point, you're going to have a realistic look. If you can tell Bam, sorry, you can't go out there because your hip's bothering you, then you can tell Kyle, or Kyle can tell Eric Spoelstra and the training staff, look, I need a couple days rest.
Well, the problem is that you don't have another point guard on the roster.
Once Tyler
Smith
comes
with
back,
the season-ending injury, when Tyler Herro comes back, we should be able to see more of those. Because if, again, 20 games in, I'm pulling Kyle Lowry into my office and I'm saying areas of improvement. Hey, can we find you some time off? Can we just find you some time off? Can we get you a week where, you know what, we're not going to play you for this week. We just need to find you some time off. I like that he's under 30 minutes per game. That's been good. So I like that they're starting to manage his minutes, even though, despite the fact that he's playing every single night. But going forward, that's sort of what I'm looking at with Kyle Lowry. That's it in terms of improvement, because he's not going to be more durable. He's not going to be magically become a more durable player than what he is right now. He's been pretty durable. But I'm going to be looking to find him some vacation time, basically, to use those vacation times before they roll over.
I've got point of attack defense, which again, as I think it's symbolic of his age necessarily. So I just don't think he's going to get much better. But maybe if you can tighten it up, there's too many instances where he gets roasted along the perimeter, which happens to everybody, no matter how good a defender you might be. And he turns around looking to blame somebody because there wasn't enough help defense there.
I think they do actually need to help him more, because I think this team has a view of what Kyle Lowry used to be, and his teammates might not fully know that, okay, Kyle Lowry's not the defender he used to be. So maybe we need to help him the way that we help Duncan Robinson and Tyler Herro behind him a little bit more.
Bring that second.
Not just leave him on an island a little bit more often. But let's do Thomas Bryant.
Well, Thomas Bryant. I think you and I both were optimistic that heat culture would save him. And yet, with time, it was guarded optimism, because we knew that he had offensive skills. We talked to him on Media Day. He seemed so optimistic about getting a boost in his career. And yet, it seems like the same problems have cropped up yet again. And he might be at a point now where he might not necessarily even have a firm place in the rotation. He's played a handful of games. Right. With Kevin Love emerging as a reliable second center and Orlando Robinson showing some pop also, it's been tough for Thomas Bryant to carve out any minutes, even in the game against Indiana. Bryant coming off the bench, Orlando Robinson starting in a game where Bam was out. So I don't know. In terms of overall productivity, I've got him at below. Like, even his offense hasn't been great. And it's all tied to his minutes not being able to get a role. And I understand it's difficult for a veteran to say, where can I find my opportunity to score or do anything when I don't get playing time? But part of that is the behind-the-scenes lack of work or the problems that he has had throughout his whole career. Job knowledge, also below expectations. You come to Miami, you better play defense. And while I think Thomas is doing his best and trying his hardest, there are still moments where he's just lost out there. He just does not know how to shift, when to play up, when to do different things defensively that Miami requires of him.
He's slow-footed.
And
it doesn't help.
He is a little slow. Yeah, I think that's part of it. But Orlando, to your point, I think is viewed as a better defender and is probably similarly slow-footed, although he's younger and been part of Miami's system for longer. Kalev, I think he's met expectations. He does what he can. He's been a good presence in the locker room, hasn't grumbled, hasn't complained.
No, and
so
he's probably their MVP in terms of like on the bench celebrations, like sideline celebrations.
I have not noticed.
He's the best at it. It's him and Kevin Love are actually the best at it. They have a good thing going. Yeah.
Now I've got to watch out for that when they're in Toronto. Okay, good to know. Good to know. Areas for improvement. Hey, defensive awareness and mobility. Those have been the same areas of improvement throughout his whole career. The health hasn't been a problem, which I'm glad to see that he's bounced back from those injuries that sapped so much of his youth. And at the same time, now it's just you're in Miami. You've got to play defense, Tom. That's all there is to it.
I'm calling him into the office 20 games in. I'm like, look, you know what? You were the backup center. You lost the job. Kevin Love is now our backup center. There's a lot of reasons for that. Mostly it's because we're trying to tie a backup center to Jimmy Butler with that unit. And so we'll see what happens when Tyler Herro comes back and we revamp the rotations again. Maybe there'll be an opportunity for you. Be ready for any opportunities that we have, because also Orlando Robinson has surpassed you because he was staying ready a little bit more than you were, and they need him to be productive. Defensively, he just is what he is. He's not going to magically become a great defender. It's never going to happen. Right. It's not his skill set. Whatever, it's fine. It's the player he is. But when you are, the reason Thomas Bryant has been able to stick in the league for this long is because he almost gives you stuff offensively that a lot of backup centers aren't able to give you. He scored 30 points in a game for the Lakers last year. He's capable of doing these kinds of things. Spacing the floor, career 36% three-point shooter. Can you find more of those opportunities when we do call your number? But really, I'm calling you into the office, Thomas Bryant. I'm saying we're probably, if we're being honest about this, we're getting you ready for your next team. We're probably getting you ready for your next team. And we would love to do that. We would love to get you paid. You have a player option for the season. We would love to get you paid and send you out with glowing reviews by the end of these 82 games. Can you be a dominant drop big? Can you just do that? Because you're never going to be a switch touch at the point of attack. You're never going to do that. You're never going to be that defender. Can you be a dominant drop big who could space the floor a little bit from three-point range? A Brook Lopez light, a Miles Turner light. Can you figure out a way to just make an impact defensively and protect the rim a little bit better? That's my advice, I think, for Thomas Bryant. And then again, when we call your number, be ready because they're going to need him at some point. We know that. It's a long season.
Absolutely.
So that was a lot of fun. I thought that worked really well, David. Really excited for part 2. Bam Adebayo. Can he be even better? Can he be even more dominant than he's been already? Has he already been basically a top 15 player, top 10 player? We're going to talk about all of that. Plus, of course, Jaime Jaquez Jr. will get a glowing 20-game evaluation. But is there an area where even he can improve? You'll have to tune in for part 2. For now, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on your podcast app. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel.